Hi guys, my name is Jerry, and today I'll be co-presenting with Aaron on the integrations behind connecting with Salesforce. And the reason we're presenting on this is because we're seeing Salesforce everywhere, and we're integrating with Salesforce absolutely everywhere. For example, we're finding we're very often extracting data out of Salesforce, syncing Salesforce data with data centers. We're integrating third-party products with Salesforce. You name it. So our goal today is to show some best practices we've discovered for integrating with Salesforce and to walk through some of these common integration patterns. So just for a quick agenda of what we'll be going through, we're first going to talk about some integration obstacles with Salesforce, then discuss some ways to integrate with Salesforce, and then solving the challenge of unlocking Salesforce data. And then finally, at the end, we're going to go through some use cases for extracting data out of Salesforce and also show some pretty cool demos as well. So just as a brief introduction for myself and my co-presenter, Aaron Lemerman. So Aaron is the cloud practice manager at Big Compass, and he's an architect at Big Compass as well. And I am a senior consultant at Big Compass. I have most of my experiences in AWS integrations and using AWS to integrate with Salesforce. And just as a brief introduction of who we are at Big Compass, we're a small IT consulting company, and we use technologies like the ones you see on the screen, such as AWS, like Web Methods, MuleSoft, Boomi, Confluent. We use all these technologies to integrate with various other platforms, including Salesforce. And just to talk about what Big Compass is all about, we are all about building connections between systems and applications, which is the integration side of things, but we're also more importantly focused on building connections between people and ideas. And we feel that's very important, especially during this time right now where most of us are working remotely and are so disconnected from each other. So that's us, that's Big Compass. And now let's get into the meat of things. So let's talk about Salesforce integrations. So first, we're gonna talk about one perspective on Salesforce, which one perspective is like a Salesforce-centric view. So having Salesforce be the center of your universe, so you've got Salesforce basically powering and integrating with all of your other platforms such as MailChimp, Oracle, NetSuite, and whatever. And but at the center of everything is Salesforce. And you might currently have this perspective. And as we go through this presentation, perhaps you might change this perspective. You might not. So that's one perspective. And now we're going to move on to, let's talk about some integration obstacles with Salesforce. So no one really talks about pain points of integrating with Salesforce. It's always talked about as a great platform for helping out with all of your business use cases, and it is. But if you Google integration pain points, you might find that you're only stumbling upon articles that talk about how Salesforce solves your pain points for your business. So we figured it's a good thing to address some common integration obstacles. So for example, you have subscription tier limits. You might have a lack of features at lower subscription tiers, causing you to have to upgrade to higher ones for certain features. And you can also have lower API and event limits at lower subscription tiers as well. Salesforce, commonly regarded as a good thing about Salesforce, is its countless customizations, which is a good thing, but it can sometimes be a double-edged sword because it also requires more resources for governance and maintenance for Salesforce implementations. So you have to know how to use all of these customizations to solve your specific use case. So it can sometimes be option overload, if you will. You have, and then that kind of leads into also having to know how to write custom code and triggers sometimes for Salesforce. So sometimes for a use case, you might need a Salesforce expert, and you might not have a Salesforce engineer on hand, which can obviously be an obstacle for your implementation. And then finally, unexpected API security. So Salesforce has great security, but it's not necessarily industry standard. So you have to take some time to learn how to use it, learn how to work with Salesforce's security model and Salesforce's tokens for making API requests. So if you can't easily overcome these obstacles, it can lead to having your data kind of locked up in Salesforce, which makes it much more difficult to synchronize with your target systems or send your valuable data to your downstream systems. And so that leads to talking about how to push your data out of Salesforce or pull your data from Salesforce. And there's really several considerations for getting your data out of Salesforce, and these are the two common approaches that you can think of. So first, there's pulling data. So pulling data involves using Salesforce's APIs to query your data on demand, and that can be great for something like a batch process, maybe running one-off processes to pull your data out of Salesforce and pushing it to another system, or running a scheduled process that maybe runs batch API requests to Salesforce every hour or something like that. And this is beneficial to go with this approach because it requires some Salesforce knowledge, but not quite as much as pushing data out of Salesforce does, because at the end of the day, it's a much lower number of moving parts, and at the end of the day, you're just using another API to pull data out of and just push it to your target systems. So so most API developers can read up on Salesforce docs for a little bit and figure out how to do this. And then there's pushing data, and this is a little more complicated, but a little more beneficial as well. So this can be done by creating triggers in Salesforce, such as push topics or platform events or change data capture, to send your events to a target system. And this is really good for real-time event-driven use cases. But like I said, it requires a little bit of a deeper Salesforce knowledge because it requires you to go into Salesforce and create these events and configure these events to send out. So that's kind of the downside, that it's a little bit of a higher complexity compared to pulling data, but it allows you to create triggers in your Salesforce and then have systems like AWS or MuleSoft or Confluent to subscribe to the events being pushed out of Salesforce. So now we're going to talk about a few different ways you can integrate, and we've touched briefly on some of these ways already. So first, like I said, there's batch processes that you can use with Salesforce. So pulling your data out of Salesforce in a batch request, and then just pushing all of your data to your target system. And like I said, this is great for non-real-time solutions. It is not great for constantly changing data, or if you have a need to see your data in real time, this is not the best solution for that. And then the second integration method is real time, which is, like I said, creating individual events for each change that occur in Salesforce. And this seems to be the way the industry is moving as a whole. So it's great for when you have all your systems and you need to see your Salesforce data in real time in your target systems. And like I said, it's not great. It might not be great if you have less frequently changing data. So if this approach could be overkill if you aren't having your data be changing all the time, or if you just simply don't need to see real-time data, and it might be an overkill type of method. And then you have a couple other ways to integrate with Salesforce. You can use App Exchange, which lets you install out-of-the-box apps to integrate with other systems. So for example, you could use a MailChimp connector to use an out-of-the-box MailChimp connector to just send your data to MailChimp in a really easy fashion. But the problem is sometimes these connectors aren't completely suitable for your use case. So you might need to reach for that custom real-time solution. And sometimes you might not even have a connector at your disposal. And then finally, there's going with custom Salesforce UI. So you can expose your data directly in Salesforce and build an entire UI in Salesforce. And for some organizations who are all in on Salesforce, such as those who might be using that Salesforce-centric model like we saw at the beginning of the presentation, this can be great. But for any organizations who need to see their Salesforce data in other systems, this isn't the way they would want to go. So those are the various ways you can integrate with Salesforce. And now basically to sum up, unlocking Salesforce data is not a trivial task. You have to do it if you want to power your downstream systems with your Salesforce data. And then you have to decide if you want to push your data out of Salesforce or pull your data out of Salesforce. And luckily, there are a lot of really easy to use pre-built connectors such as AWS AppFlow, MuleSoft's Salesforce connector, Confluent Salesforce connector, and they can all help speed up your integrations a lot. And then at that point, once you use these connectors and consume your data out of Salesforce, you can write your custom code to run transformations after that and then push them to target systems pretty easily. So now we're going to talk about some real-time use cases for Salesforce, because real-time events are the next trend. Gone are the days of batch processing. The industry is moving to real-time because they play well with event-driven architectures and a microservices-based approach, both of which are great architectures for the modern enterprise. And the more we can deliver real-time data, the better insights we can get, the quicker we can take action, and the more we can unlock the potential of the data running through our systems. So let's talk about the various ways of eventing out of Salesforce. First off, you got platform events. These are highly customizable pub sub type of events, and these are probably a little more complex than the last three rows in this table, but they are also the most customizable for most use cases. So they're our favorite approach to go with because of that customizability, but they require the most Salesforce knowledge probably. And then there's push topics, which allow you to push out of the box type of events out of Salesforce. And they're really advantageous because they can help you kickstart your implementation. But and a disadvantage is they aren't as customizable as platform events. And then another really popular one is change data capture, which lets you publish new or changed records on an object, and they let you send out notifications for changes on an object. Very easy to implement, but again, not as customizable as platform events. And then finally, a slightly antiquated approach, you have outbound events, which send SOAP messages to a web service. And they can even send XML payloads to a RESTful endpoint as well. But some huge disadvantages to this is that, again, they're not as customizable. And with this approach, you're dealing with XML data, which can be a little bit harder to work with than the first three approaches we have here. So those are the various approaches. Like I said, we usually like to use platform events to push data out of Salesforce. And the first approach we're going to talk about here is using AWS. Now, AWS or serverless in general usually gets a bad rap because it's a little bit harder to work with than some other systems like MuleSoft or Confluent, because it's a little bit more complex. However, something really nice Amazon came out with kind of recently is Amazon AppFlow, which allows you to, it gives you access to some kind of out-of-the-box connectors for certain platforms like Salesforce. So in this diagram, we are using platform events to publish data out of Salesforce. And then here, Amazon AppFlow is subscribing to those events with an out-of-the-box type of system, and then automatically pushing that data to S3. And using AppFlow literally can take just a matter of minutes to set up. So it was really nice to be able to set this up, and we'll be showing a demo of this in a few minutes. So it pushes data to S3, and then at that point, you can really start using your custom code to start transforming your data, sending it through your own workflow, and sending it to your target systems inevitably. So that's a common way that we will typically unlock Salesforce data using AWS. Another approach is using MuleSoft, and as you can plainly see in this diagram, MuleSoft has a few less moving parts than AWS, and for good reason. Some benefits of MuleSoft not only include API management, API enablement, and API security, but it's also good for its ease of standing up MuleSoft APIs and apps. So MuleSoft is a Salesforce company, and it contains a great Salesforce connector. So it's really easy to send out these platform events using Salesforce and just automatically read these events in very easily with MuleSoft. And then you can see here we're pushing it through Anypoint MQ. And we have another process at the end of this flowchart that can do some transformations and inevitably send it off to its target systems here. And as you can see here, we're actually kind of using AWS as well to use their simple notification service to send out to the target system. So it also showcases how you can use kind of a hybrid model if you want to, reaching for something like AWS and MuleSoft to achieve your implementation. And then finally, a bit of an interesting solution is using Confluent to unlock your data. So Confluent is kind of close to an all-in-one type of solution. So Confluent is managed Kafka, Kafka in the cloud, for those of you who aren't familiar with Confluent. And so it acts as both the messaging and processing layer. And it also provides some really nice connectors for Salesforce. So once again, you have Salesforce publishing the events. You have Confluent subscribing to the events. And then within the Confluence all-in-one platform, you have you can route your events to the correct topics and send those out to your consumers. So the right is a little bit different than the last two diagrams. We're using a socket to send real-time events to our target systems, or our target consumer applications in this case. And we're also sending our data to a database that our mobile and web consumers can read from using an API as well. So that is how you could do it in Confluent. It's really, really easy to work with and set up. And just to sum up everything, Salesforce, you can integrate with Salesforce using a lot of nice pre-built connectors to help speed up your integrations and make it easy to get your data into a tool to unlock your processing potential. Because once you get your data out of Salesforce using these connectors, it's very trivial to write your code like you would in a normal microservice type of system. You can use things like AWS and MuleSoft and Confluent to easily, add new subscribers and push your data to things like databases and cold storage, Hadoop, any kind of consumer application. You can do duplicate detection and execute your data in a pub sub model and synchronize your data and all of that good stuff using things like AWS and MuleSoft and Confluent. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Aaron, and he's going to talk about our use cases and show you guys some demos.
Right. Thanks, Jerry. I'll take over the screen share if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. That was great. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to keep putting them in the chat. We'll get to them after we go through each piece.
Yeah, keep putting them in the chat, please. And I love that people are putting in the chat, certain things about how certain enterprises might interact with these technologies. I'll actually talk about that in 1 second. So I'm here to talk about use cases and run a demo with MuleSoft and AWS. And hopefully it's exciting for you, kind of get to see how the different technologies interact with Salesforce. And so, we're here to talk about use cases. And like Jerry said, real-time events are the next trend. Gone are the days of batch processing. Even though we see batch processing still in organizations, all organizations seem to be moving from batch to these event-driven real-time events. And what we're talking about here, these connectors and these technologies play really well with the real-time events and the event-driven architecture. And I think the more that you can deliver real-time data, the better insights you can get for your organization, the quicker you can take action, and the more value that you can deliver for your organization. So let's talk about MuleSoft. And the first thing I'll say about MuleSoft is obviously it's a Salesforce company. The MuleSoft Salesforce connector is probably the best connector for Salesforce that I've seen. It's like I said, Salesforce company, so they put a lot of time and effort into developing this connector to be extremely robust. And you can get almost anything you want out of MuleSoft Salesforce connector. And to relate MuleSoft to the size of the business, there's been some comments on this in the chat. MuleSoft is usually geared towards at least medium-sized enterprises. It's going to be your mid to large-sized enterprises that are typically buying MuleSoft and implementing it, organization-wide. Now that said, there is an open source version of MuleSoft, and you can get started with MuleSoft, very quickly and easily, even for free. But again, oftentimes if you're going to roll it out organization-wide and you want to use all the features of MuleSoft, it's usually geared towards those larger businesses. So feel free to ask questions about that. And one really great use case for MuleSoft is the API ecosystem. MuleSoft, absolutely dominates this space. One of their value offerings is that they play really well in the API space and they play really well in the integration space. And they are the dominant, iPaaS platform to be able to offer both of those, integrations plus APIs. And so if you want to create an API ecosystem, MuleSoft is a great way to go for its API design, build, deployment, and management and monitoring, all packaged into one. And so, let's say in this use case, you want to centralize employee information and management in one custom web application, and you need to integrate with custom HR database and Salesforce and Workday. And you need to be able to combine all that information into your unified view in your custom web application. Well, MuleSoft is a great use case for that, actually. And what MuleSoft preaches is this 3-layer API architecture that you can see on the screen. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you start with a system API, and the system API is used to sit in front of your target or source system. So, in this case, you can have a Salesforce system API and a Workday system API. And then a process API would sit in front of that. That's your second layer. Process API would be used to combine the results from these various system APIs into sort of one unified API. And then you can have what's called an experience API in front of that. And your experience API can tailor those responses or those results to your web application. And so you can create this, what they call a reusable ecosystem of APIs to not only be used for this single use case, but you can create these APIs and reuse them now across your organization from all of your SASE and AppE different products across your organization. And this also helps you control access to your various systems, helps you monitor the access to your various systems, manage the access, secure the access, and so on and so forth. There's lots of benefits to creating this reusable ecosystem of APIs, and MuleSoft is a great use case for it. Second is Confluent. So you can be up and running with Confluent in 5 minutes or less. One of its great value offerings. The Confluent Cloud is all based in the cloud, obviously, and can be accessed through a browser. And Confluent Kafka have been used for the smallest businesses, even startups, because Kafka is open source. Confluent adopts more of a pay-as-you-go model and more of a serverless type of model. And it's been used all the way up to the Fortune 100, so the Disneys, the Exxons of the world, all use Kafka, whether it's open source or, the paid version in Confluent. So Confluent just really contains a very wide range of enterprises that they can target. And so a great use case with Confluent is if you have a need to enrich and transform data from multiple sources before it's sent to a target system. So you're sort of staging up your data from all these various sources before you actually send it off. Confluent or Kafka is a great technology solution to be able to handle that. That's actually really hard to accomplish in something like a MuleSoft or even in custom code or in AWS. But what Confluent does is it can bring in all these different messages from these various source systems using its connector ecosystem. And then it might not release those events or those messages until you get, certain amount of data or the trigger for that data that actually allows you to release that out to your target system or systems. So let's say you need to collect data from 5 different source systems, and not until you've collected all that data from your 5 different source systems, you want to be able to send that out to Salesforce, for example. Well, you can wait until you've collected all that data, and then you can trigger based on that final system coming in and sending off to Salesforce. Really great all-in-one solution for that type of use case. And finally, AWS. So AWS, if you're not familiar with it, is the leading cloud provider out there. Services something like 175 different services within AWS. And those are just sort of the building blocks that you can use within AWS to accomplish your different integration solutions or variety of other solutions like machine learning and artificial intelligence. But we're here to talk about integrations. You can also be up and running with AWS in 5 minutes or less. You can be up and running with AWS for free even. There's free tiers for a lot of the AWS services. So, again, I would echo the message, AWS is geared towards, the smallest business all the way up to the largest organization in the Fortune 100. And a great use case for AWS is synchronizing data between a source system and a target system. And in this case, what I have on the screen here is synchronizing Salesforce data with a variety of different target systems. So you can do this with Salesforce at the left-hand side of the screen here, using Amazon's AppFlow Salesforce connector, and then running through a set of serverless services to be able to send those downstream to your consumer applications, as Jerry already talked about. And if you want to accomplish two-way sync, you can do it from the other way around too. You can hook in these other source systems, either using Amazon AppFlow or reusable API or other connectors, maybe a database connector that you can listen to certain events that occur on a database or pull a database at a 1-minute interval, for example, to be able to send changed events the other way from a database back to Salesforce. And so this is great for your near real-time use cases, great ongoing cost because you're going to have pretty minimal ongoing cost if you accomplish this in AWS. You can execute the most complex business logic because AWS is extremely flexible. It's the most flexible solution we're here to talk about today. You can exclude duplicate detection, your referential integrity issues. You can all sort out in the AWS serverless services. It really gives you a great amount of flexibility, and then also offers that extreme scale. It's nearly infinite scale with the AWS serverless services. And so a couple things to notice here. We're sort of wrapping up on the presentation. Number one, the center of the universe changes a little bit. So the first slide that Jerry showed Salesforce at the center of the universe, but now we're seeing it sliding towards the left, or in another diagram, it might also slide towards the right if it were a target system. In this diagram, it's a source system sliding towards the left, and Salesforce might feed other consumer applications or other target systems, and it might also, that data might come back to Salesforce. So from an integration perspective, we're sort of seeing Salesforce not necessarily being the center of the universe. The integrations that move the data from the integration perspective are the center of the universe. And then second, you can take a hybrid approach. So I can hook in Amazon AppFlow here to listen to Salesforce events. I can hook in MuleSoft Salesforce connector here, to listen to Salesforce platform events and hook that in the exact same way. And I can do the same thing with Confluent in the exact same way, and then still use that back end. And what I would recommend here, if we're sort of talking about architecture, is your entry point into your system might change. It might be Amazon's connector, it might be MuleSoft's connector or Confluent's connector. But then that back end, that's sort of where the core logic lies and the core value lies. And you can hook in these different technologies at the edge of your system. And it doesn't necessarily what you hook in at the edge of your system, as long as that core is able to handle those different events. And we even recommend oftentimes a hybrid approach. So it might be hybrid between MuleSoft and AWS, or Confluent and AWS, or any kind of combination of the technologies that we've talked about today. And so last slide to wrap up here. Salesforce centric was what we saw at the beginning, and maybe we changed mindsets just a little bit, where the integration centric approach is where the MuleSofts of the world and the Confluents of the world and AWSs of the world live at the center of the universe and connect all of these different applications across the organization. So I'm very excited to demo this, and we're going to look at MuleSoft first. And then we'll take a look at AWS as well. So I have a running MuleSoft application here. And what I can show is just really quick. I have a subscription to a platform event in Salesforce. And all I'm doing is I'm looking at this contact platform event from MuleSoft. And whenever I get a change to a contact in Salesforce, this MuleSoft flow will trigger. And all I've done to be able to stand this up, pretty quick and easy, pretty painless, is I have given my credentials here to just a Salesforce developer, a free developer instance, and automatically makes the connection off to Salesforce and listens to those platform events. And this is already running. I just have one simple logger here that will log the entire event or payload, as MuleSoft calls it, and then I have an insert going into the database. So I'm going to switch over to Salesforce here, and in Salesforce, I'll show the platform event really fast. Very simple platform event. If you've never created a platform event before, you come into the setup portion of Salesforce, and you'll see platform events underneath the integrations section. And if I go to I created a contact platform event, like I said. Contact platform event comes out of the box with a few standard fields, and then you can hook in as many custom fields as you want, and even hook in some custom triggers. And this is where you would get into writing Apex code if you were to hook in some custom triggers for your platform events. But all I've done, very, very simple. I've created a custom field for first name and last name of contacts that I'll be changing. And by the way, in the chat, I'd love to hear, since I can't see you raise your hand, but I'd love to hear if you, kind of dove into platform events or not in the past. If you're more on the admin side or the developer side, creating these types of things. And this is the Denver Salesforce meetup. So I hope you're Avalanche fans out there. I'm a big Avs fan. And so I've created some of the old Avalanche here in our contact section of Salesforce. And so what I can do, I can target Rob Blake, for example, old time Avalanche, and I can go, rblake@gmail.com, and this will trigger that platform event, and that platform event will send out the event to its subscribers. And so what we should see now in MuleSoft is I have my debugger perspective open, so I've stopped the flow on this logger. If you're not very familiar with code, it's not a big deal. But what we can see is that Rob Blake object, you kind of see that here. And this piece right here, you can see Blake, Rob come through almost instantaneously in our MuleSoft flow. And the only other thing this will do is this will log if I run this through, and then it'll insert Rob Blake with its new email address into our database. So I'm going to run that through. And then I have my database right here. And it would have just been an insert for Rob Blake. And I'll go ahead and search for Rob Blake here. And it would have been that rblake@gmail.com email address is what we're looking for. And let's see if we can get it.
Very cool. Yeah, Aaron, I don't know if you saw the chat there. Thank you, Kathai. Sorry if I mess up your name there. He was asking a few minutes back if we could use system API in lieu of external objects, if there was any pros and cons. I know that's probably a bit specialized in the Salesforce space, so I don't know if you're familiar with external objects in Salesforce.
I am, yeah. So you can basically pull in external objects as if they were native to Salesforce, right?
Yep. So he was asking about using system API versus external objects. So
yeah, absolutely. I think system API is a great use case almost always. You know, if you're talking about any source or target system, you want, basically the premise is you want to eliminate these point-to-point connections. And so if you're creating a point-to-point connection, you probably want to take a look at that, and you know, something breaks in the future, that API changes in the future, you want to have that sort of middleman, which is your system API, to be able to monitor access, control access, throttle if you need to, secure access, and also abstract that target or source system. So I think that's a great use case for it.
And I'm far from an integration expert. It's one of the certs I haven't pursued yet, but is coming up fast for me. So feel free to correct, or anyone else in the chat. But my perspective on external objects is they're more for when you just need to view typically. So for instance, if your use case is like orders, right, or like order tracking, if you don't need to use that information in Salesforce for anything like actionable, you just need to be able to look at it in the same screen. That's typically what I've heard for external objects. I haven't used them in production myself.
Right, completely agree.
Okay. And I put a link in there, yeah.
By the way, I forgot, I'm not actually inserting email. So that was a bad use case. But you know, we see our timestamp here. This was the Rob Blake object we just had in there. I wasn't eventing email out, you know, using that platform event. So we don't see rblake@gmail.com, but we do see, you know, 2 minutes ago, this Rob Blake object come in. And all I would have to do, you know, going back to my platform event, is create that custom field email to be able to get that email, you know, and insert that into the database. So that's MuleSoft. Couple quick connectors. You can see it's meant to be overly simplified, but you know, that kind of gives you a good snapshot of how MuleSoft works. You know, pretty easy to get stood up. Again, kind of geared towards those mid to large enterprises. I'll show AWS now as well, unless there's any other questions about MuleSoft.
I was gonna say, I think this is great. I know, you know, there's a good chance, I know we have a mixed audience here, small, medium business. Thanks again for the surveys, everyone, and the admin, developer. We've got some higher level folks, but yeah, I think just being able to see some of this behind the curtain, even if you don't know, right? We got the recording, you can go back and reference. So I know I was fortunate to work in an enterprise setting and be able to kind of, you know, savoir, some people in the Salesforce know administration by walking around. You can also learn a lot by sitting over the arm of a integration architect and watching them work in some of these tools and pick up some things. So yeah, being able to see some of this, obviously a lot of it may not be immediately making some sense, but I think it's very helpful to see the flow from a perspective like yours.
Yeah, and I think it's always valuable to understand the downstream and the upstream, because you know, understanding both, even if you don't work hands-on with it, will make you, you know, more effective in an area that you do work on.
And I did see a wheel snipe Selly, which I had to Google. I'm old, but I don't know everything apparently. And so Jason Sandoval is with you on the hockey there. So yeah, good reference. And I know one of our locals that's been frequent attendee, Aaron, he likes to use sports figures as well in his demos. So you're in good company.
All right, great. Got some good fans out there. Love this group. Okay, so next one we're going to show is Amazon's AppFlow. And I'm going to show, we can start actually here. So I created this Amazon AppFlow called SFDC Contacts S3. And all this is going to do is going to take those events, those platform events of contact information, and send them to S3. There was a question on what S3 is. S3 is AWS's object storage. It's nearly infinitely scalable. Can even be used like a file system. And I'll show you exactly how that works here in 1 second. And so all I've done here, if I go in and edit this flow, is I've named the flow, and if I go to the flow's configuration, all I've done right here is use this Salesforce, you know, pre-built connection tool filled out for Aaron's dev instance, you know, basically my username and password and security token, And that was it. I was off and running in just a couple of minutes here. I mean, honestly, this was my easiest integration with Salesforce that I've ever done using Appflow. So those serverless tools in AWS are only becoming more easy to use and becoming more configuration based. And all I'm doing is I'm pumping that object using JSON into Amazon S3. And along the way, you can do some transformations. I'm just doing a simple pass through. Each one of these fields that we see here are simply being passed through into S3, although I could do some simple transformations here if I wanted to. So back to the flow. And if I look at this run history, we should have seen at about, 57, actually I need to refresh. At 50 after the hour, most people are on Mountain Time, so this is 4:50. This was that same Rob Blake change that I made. So 2 subscribers were actually subscribing to that same platform event for Rob Blake. And it begins in this 1.5F. And if I go over to S3 here, I'm landing all of those objects persisted, indefinitely for the rest of time in this particular bucket here. And if I search for 1.5F, we're going to see our execution. And within here is just my raw event. I can come in here, I can download this. And when I download this and just view it in a simple text editor, we can see that JSON event. So this is really powerful. I know that's simple, but this is the first sort of step into almost all integrations when you're working with these types of integrations where you're moving data from one location to another. We get that Salesforce data, we persist it, and that persistence is the key to doing everything else downstream. So now that we've persisted that in our tool of choice in AWS, in this case, we can do whatever we want with that object. We can invoke AWS Lambdas on that, which is AWS's serverless functions that can run and go and process this message and then send it off to any downstream consumers that we want to. So this is really key, although I know that that's a simple demo and it's meant to be simple because Appflow makes it very simple. And then the last thing that I can do is in another Salesforce instance, we're going to show just synchronization from Salesforce to a database. And this is the last piece that I'll show. So in another Salesforce instance, what we can do is let's use Peter Forsberg. Let's do peterforsberg@gmail.com. And I'll make this change. And when I make that change, what's going to happen is, again, in near real time, we have an event going out to what we call a serverless syncing engine that we've built at Big Compass. And the serverless syncing engine basically takes these events from Salesforce and persists them to a database and vice versa. They can go from the database back to Salesforce. But what's kind of cool along the way is using AWS out-of-the-box tools, we can start to run some very simple queries. And what you have to do along the way is detect duplicates. That's a very common integration scenario. We don't want 2 instances, of Joe Sakic to end up in the target. Or, worse yet, we want to prevent an echo chamber where if Salesforce is sending information to a database, that database might turn around and send that same information back to Salesforce. And you don't want to send that object right back to Salesforce because that could keep ping-ponging around, infinitely if you're not detecting those duplicates. So you want to only send the valid objects from one system to another. And we just have a very simple SQL-like query here detecting duplicates. And we can see a few duplicates, over the last few hours here. And this just scans through all the logs that these serverless services are producing and detecting those duplicates in a graphical format. And those logs look something like this, where you probably can't see these logs very well, but that's okay. I'll expand one of these, where we're running a deduplify function, and we're creating a hash out of some primary keys in these data objects, and then we're determining if a duplicate occurred or not. And if a duplicate occurs, then we simply throw it out. We know that that's not a valid object. We want to prevent that echo chamber, prevent those duplicates, and we simply stop the execution if we find a duplicate. And then finally, last piece is in the database. Now we should see Peter Forsberg @gmail.com. We do indeed see Peter Forsberg @gmail.com. And, you know, we were to kind of compare timestamps here, you know, this happens in simply a matter of seconds. It's everything is near real time here since we're running that event-driven architecture out of Salesforce. So that's it for Jerry and my presentation. Like Jerry said, I'm the cloud practice manager at Big Compass. I would love to connect with you. I love, you know, meeting people not only in our community, but across the United States, as I saw in the chat. And feel free to connect with Jerry or me on LinkedIn. Thank you for having me, everyone.